Well, I've been looking forward to talking with you too because, in this crazy AI world that we're in, right? I've been doing some research these past couple of weeks into like what should a platform engineer be doing to help out with AI stuff, whether AI is used for developers or by developers, I mean, to put in their applications, or I don't know, used as kind of like a chat thing here and there, whatever it is. And I think, well, I mean, maybe y'all can tell me, but when it comes to, let's say, security and governance, and to put it in my wacky way, things to freak out about, there's a lot in the AI space, and I think you two both have a background and also firsthand experience with people who do freak out about stuff a lot in a good way. But anyways, why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we'll get right into it.
All right. Hey, great to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. My name is Chris Cropper. I'm a modern compliance architect with the VMware Tanzu team. And what that boils down to is that I do cybersecurity compliance, primarily NIST 853 risk management framework, but have nearly, at this point, 25 years between military service and then defense contracting. And so I guide DoD teams through the risk accreditation process, which does include modern technologies such as the software factory, and kind of most recently established AI policy and processes.
How about yourself, David?
I'm David Zendzian. Nice to talk once again, Kote. I always enjoy your point of view on the universe. It is enlightening and very heartful toward me. But I am the short way of putting it, the Tanzu security champion. Formerly, I've been known as like field CISO. As I see it, I'm an advocate to our customers on making sure our software meets their governance and security needs. But with the Broadcom acquisition, I'm actually also responsible for making sure that Tanzu as a division meets the policies and governance that Broadcom requires. So I get involved.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah, so I get involved in the actual AI. It's not my role in the AI, but there is security in AI. But I've gotten involved in the conversations on we're in the unique spot of not only consuming AI, but also producing tools to allow others to use AI. So most policies don't fit that nice angle of things. So, like always, get to just enjoy the security conversation in all parts of my life.
Yeah, I don't know if you get involved. I forget the list of authors, Chris, but I every time I see a document from David, I'm like, I need to buckle in because this is going to be like 300 pages of detailed policy and bullet points, and in a good way, right? Like it's just sort of like, because when people ask about compliance stuff, they're not just looking for a white paper. They want like line by line what's going on.
Uh,
So that's
I it describes it perfect.
enjoyable is the word I want to use, but it's a
It,
little less than enjoyable. It's informative, I think, is.
no, 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 absolutely. And there's a quote. I actually took my daughter is 9, but I shared with her recently. We were talking about it. But one of Einstein's things that he's known for is saying that you can tell when someone is truly good at something when they can explain it simply. And so what I love about David is you'll get all of the details, but they're good and they're helpful. So yeah, 100%. David is outstanding at sharing content that is thorough, but incredibly um, just the right level of granularity to get the point across and teach.
That's right. The most engaging compliance attestation you'll ever
Right.
encounter.
Yes. Yes.
I
Thanks,
think
y'all.
we'll put that as on the book flap cover
There we
for the
go.
next one. Anyhow, so before we get into how, I'm sure if someone's watching this video, they've got a good idea of like what securing and compliance for AI, like what the problem space is. But that said, I think nowadays, when thinking about anything that's like AI or generative AI or whatever, especially in the areas that you two are working in, I think it's worth going over, let's say, what people not only think it is, but what it's being used for. So I'm a big fan of the old phrase, the purpose of the system is the system, if you will, right? I think I butchered that systems phrase, but it's sort of like what the thing does is the purpose of it, regardless of what it was described. So when you're talking through and looking at in other areas of what people are doing with generative AI, like what are they doing in y'all spaces? How are they using it?
Actually, the best quote I can think on that one was from John from Fiserv at a panel I just was having a conversation with at Explorer last week. We were actually talking about this whole piece about it and AI from their point of view, especially if it's well in governance, because they have a well-established governance policy. It's just another software.
The key, the fortunate thing at Fiserv is that these controls already existed. Tweaking them for new technology so far has not been that great a challenge.
And as we've been saying forever, software runs everything, runs the world, if you want to go back to the old quote. But AI is in everything. If you think about it, in my security world, every security tool is processing enormous amounts of data. It's a perfect use case for AI. Financial organizations have been doing, anti-money laundering and, fraud check for decades. They've been doing machine learning. Let's not forget AI is not new. The ability to talk to a computer is new. That actually having a natural language interface changes the perception of what we're doing with these tools, but it is just
Mm.
software. So that's why it comes that our business is to produce software and platforms. So it naturally indicates that our software and platforms will both use AI from the amount of, like, picture the amount of log data. Say you've got 1,000 applications running, and the amount of log data coming from that, it's more than you can monitor. And we've been building SIM tools for decades, and those are basically machine learning. They didn't have some of the tools we have of approaching that from an agentic, interface between tools. So I think that the tooling is up to a new thing, but it is just software. And we've been doing software for a long time. We know the patterns. In fact, one of my most exciting things about AI is it's one of the few times where we've seen a brand new, massive, culture changing technology, and security was like the first day conversation. It wasn't like when we did Kubernetes, we came in and did like cert manager a year later. It's like we always build that first app and you go, well, we'll add authentication later. Let's get it working. But AI started, and the first questions were, we see this as potential. We know it's going to need security, and security's always happened from day one. So that's been, I don't know, the most interesting part of that.
Let me ask you a little sidebar question here that I've been thinking about. And you went over the case of, or some of the examples of using AI for like SIM tools, which correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of like log monitoring and management and checking on all your security parameters, to broadly generalize it.
That is
Like
one part of
a
it. Yeah,
tool you
yeah.
have. Yeah, yeah, and then hopefully like resolving. It's just a tool that security people use, not just, but a broad set of tools. And I've been wondering, like, if generative AI stuff will sort of primarily be used in tools to run applications, or actually more in applications, or both, right? Because it's sort of like, like in the Tanzu platform, for example, you can deploy, like, manage the Tanzu platform through an AI chat session, right? And there's a lot of those cases, and I wonder what the mix between, like, adding it to management suites, or even just kind of like the way that we use chat applications now are, versus like this application has like Gen AI embedded in it doing something.
Well, first let me say it's gonna be easier for a next generation who has grown up not wanting to talk to people. They like to text. So this next generation of
Uh-huh.
people who works in the texting world we've built well, they're building it themselves too. Um,
That's true.
so, but it's gonna be it, a wide variety. Yes, again, we're talking to computers. We have the interface to it, and we can have it do things for us. One of my favorite books. I mean, we talked earlier about authors and the tie to AI. I am in computer science because of the three laws of robotics. So yes, I do believe that there needs to be a way of approaching this, but I also understand in a commercial world we're in, people aren't going to follow the same rules. So we have to prepare for people who don't have security, and how do you build that around it. Um,
Mm.
it's I think that you will use AI for what your purpose is. Hackers are using it to make phishing emails or phishing voice attacks actually realistic, where it can interact with you and you think it's a real person, and then it can manipulate people easier. Attackers are using it. In fact, they had the DARPA challenge at DEF CON a few weeks ago. It's been going on for a while, but this is the second iteration where they're actually attacking, going back and forth. And I was just listening to a podcast, and I think it was uh, something Atlanta that won, but I can't remember. Anyway, but the idea is you have computers attacking each other. They're actually analyzing code, looking for vulnerabilities. They had the first instance of a CVE found through just taking AI, pointing at code and saying, find a vulnerability. We think, and it said, well, I think based upon the prior history that there's going to be something in this space here. And it found it. Now we have finding of vulnerabilities, patching of vulnerabilities. I mean, it's getting to a point where it can do anything, um, but within reason. It does make mistakes, and it's not like people. It was trained on us, and we we make mistakes. So I don't, anything you could think of that you can do, because remember, there's going to be communication between services. So if you're doing a wire transfer. Why are you doing a wire transfer? You're doing it to send money to your child to go to college. So there's actually 3 transactions in one. Realistically, each one of those services should be talking to each other about what they're doing it for, and validating the path on the way. And that's what MCP would be doing. Is each company provides an agent to itself, saying, "Hey, I'm an agent. I provide these services." And then you start connecting those agents together, and that's the agentic stuff we're coming into now. And that's not natural language, because that service is talking to each other, but that still is AI in the background going, "Hey, I need access to this fund. Well, are you authorized? Well, who are you representing? I'm representing this person." That whole communication, it's no different than we did in applications and microservices. And in fact, one of the recurring stories I'm seeing, even in security podcasts, I listen to too many as I'm on the road all the time. um, the idea that agentic AI is just software. So if you've done the app modernization work, you've actually taken your application and broke it into the logical components that actually work segmented together. From a security person point of view, we've segmented the data. We put the things that need to be complied, PCI in an environment, stuff that's your internal HR stuff and another stuff, and you micro manage in the environment together. Now AI just allows the same communication flows, the same data functions, but with the ability to add some more logic to it. So it's more than just the natural language. It's the actual machine learning. It's the agentic communications. I don't know. I think it's gonna be everywhere.
I think you've helped clean up my question there, like the kind of framing, which is will AI applications continue just to be like natural language based things like talking with a bot
Definitely not.
or whatever the kids call it, right? Or in addition to that, as you were, I mean, I think I would know the answer you would give because you just gave it, but like, will this natural languageness go into like computers talking to computers, to put it in a jokey way, right? And I think that kind of beyond the existing like kind of ML things that you see, like that's what I'm curious to see happens more in the, I don't know, that area is kind of sort of what agentic stuff seems to be. But Chris, so going back, like what are you seeing people use AI for nowadays? Like not only what do they think it is, but like what it what is it being used for? What is it doing?
So yeah, and what David said, and your comment about the purpose of the system being the system, I want to kind of to answer that question. I want to pull that thread on data as the focus a little bit. Before we started this discussion, we had a quick chat about everybody should know a doctor, a lawyer, a mechanic. We named off some of those people that you should know in your life because they all fulfill a critical purpose. And so when we look at data, or rather at RMF, again, the compliance process in the DoD, the first step is categorizing a system. And interestingly, a lot of teams will focus on that and they'll say, okay, I just need to decide what we call the high watermark. What is the risk level of the data that I have? But the thing is that one of the most complex NIST guides is on categorization of systems. It's how do you actually assess the risk of your data? And so when you do this correctly, you'll actually go through this 500-page manual. We have templates, right, to simplify it, which, by the way, we should probably start, with that in mind, probably feeding into some of our LLM models and actually start better questioning how we assess that. But the risk of AI, again, going to your answer of what is it used for, is the ability to aggregate data. Many years ago, if any of my Army friends are watching this, they'll know this. I'm sitting across from the sergeant major at 19, doing my board to become a sergeant, and he made the comment, "You don't have to know every answer. You have to know where to find it." And that's the key when to a lot of the good uses of AI that I see is understanding that you don't know everything, but when you have your model trained successfully and when you have it secured based on the risk of the data that it's accessing, it can become a very powerful tool to get answers. So a lot of the work I've done is also with data science environments in the DoD. And so what I am seeing is I'll see models from anything from how to simulate artillery rounds, right, or how to do fluid dynamics of aircraft. That's a huge one. Um, and one of the other points that I hope we kind of touch on is how long has AI, or how long has large language models been around? Boeing, for instance, one of the little known facts is that the 787 Dreamliner is one of the first aircraft that was designed completely with computers. They didn't actually build physical wind tunnels to test it. They did flow testing and all of this incredible science just by computer. And so a lot of that was data processing, similar to what you'll see now being used in large language. Again, not generative AI in the sense of being able to look up data resources, but that ability to aggregate data, mass amounts of data, and use it for an outcome. Um, I don't know if that kind of answers, but yeah, I've seen numerous data science now environments and R&D teams in the DoD. Again, any number of purposes, designing of technologies, assessing communications capabilities, and then also just aggregating intelligence data, right? I mean, satellite. I've heard, not work directly with a customer. One of the things I've read about is teams actually doing analysis of satellite data using AI tools and data science tools, and they function better than the human eye. They're able to find targets of opportunity or whatever the case may be, just using generative AI and using that aggregation capability.
Yeah, I guess it's just sort of like this next level. A lot of what you're going over is this next level of analytics, of
Yes, that's
analysis, of
100%
looking
data
around and
science.
finding something. And yeah, and then another one that I think both of you have mentioned that I think is, I forget who I heard say this recently, but it's an interesting way of looking at it, is like integration. Like a new way of doing integration stuff,
Absolutely.
kind of like you were talking about a little bit, David, where you have got all these different services working with each other. And normally, from like a programming point of view, when you integrate something, it has to be perfect, right? Like it's very like the protocols and the data they exchange have to be compatible. They've got to know how to do the error handling and things like that. But in theory, if you have all these AI, if you have kind of AI stuff running around, there's a level of sloppiness you can introduce that like might be helpful. I don't know, but that integration part seems kind of interesting. So, it's hard to know where to start with, like, so how do you secure all of that? But I think one that you two probably encounter a lot, and that seems like in most every organization, but especially larger ones, it seems like the first thing is like, we need some policy, right? Like before we even think about what it is we're going to do, like what is the policy that we have? I don't know. Does
Right.
that seem like the first place that people start when they're starting to bring this in?
So I think the easiest way to start with it is we already have policy. And as Chris had just mentioned, the data is always the first place you start. And anything you're securing, what is it you're handling? And this goes to the core of any policy is what is it? Who's allowed to have access to it? How are you supposed to handle it? How are you supposed to dispose of it when you're done handling it? And then how do you get access to just look at it and or change it? So once you have the policies around all of that and the procedures, it's just a matter of implementing. It's a recurring theme that I'm hearing a lot is it is nothing different in technology. It's just another software application. So
Yes.
we've got it. We just follow the policy. We follow the procedures we have. Now, the challenge, and I've seen this in action here, is we're trying to figure out AI moves fast. And when it comes to policy, but the procedures of what is allowed, how are you allowed to use it, where the actual rubber meets the road part, that is challenging because we already know that security teams are overwhelmed. They don't have enough people to do all application security right now. Now we're seeing the application space is bigger. How do they handle that? And I think that's where I'm seeing the struggle is just keeping up with the technologies releasing. Do we allow that? Do we not allow that? And then how do we prevent that or how do we enable that? It's a very complex question on those two pieces because if you're doing anything at scale, if you're a large enterprise and you have thousands of applications and thousands of developers, you don't want to slow them down, but you also got to protect that data. And this is the key to your business.
So Chris, like as David was saying, you brought up the securing your data part, and then with this framing that like it's just another application in a helpful way, not a dismissive way, with that sentiment. Like, are are organizations set up to have their data secured? Like, is it easy enough to just like, oh, we've got this pipe, that's cool, now we just hook the AI thing up to the pipe, we're all done, right? Or is there like additional work that has to go on, like, because it's a different type of technology?
I love that David said that because that's actually one of the phrases that I'll say with customers too, as we have this conversation, is that in many ways AI is as generative AI, right? As this level that we're in now is typically it has more in common with just a web application than anything else. It's just a different type of interface and a resource that is accessing data, and so So actually, I have something. Am I allowed to phone a friend? Can I read something?
Sure.
So I went ahead and pulled up the DoD recently released order on AI cybersecurity, and this is, I think, incredibly relevant. I just want to read a quick sentence early on. Successfully managing cybersecurity risk in AI systems requires the underlying infrastructure layer and AI models that enable them to be free of exploitable vulnerabilities and to function as expected and designed. DoD organizations must hold external and internal suppliers in the supply chain to the same security standards as that of the organization maintaining and using the AI system. And then it talks a bit about just hardware, software vulnerabilities, supply chain exploitation, just some of these layers. So here's why. So going back to how is an AI resource as an application treated? It still comes back to the infrastructure. And the most important thing you can do is actually have that defense in depth and some of those known defensive strategies that have already been well documented by NIST, by MITRE, by many different sources. Have your infrastructure secured, and going back to that data accreditation, know the value of your data. One of the things that's huge in the DoD and really the public sector in general is data aggregation. You can also make the mistake of only focusing on one type of data, but by introducing a tool that is able to aggregate that data and output something that makes that data more useful and usable, you have to be aware of the potential risk there, right? What is, if you combine multiple data sources into one output, there's possibly an increased risk. So that goes back to then, how do you treat the underlying infrastructure? How do you secure it? What level of risk is there? And so that's a whole nother then um, defensive cybersecurity. And again, back to risk accreditation and concepts. That's part of why ATOs might take even longer if you don't have the right team and the right automation in place. And we've heard for years now, oh, the ATO process, it takes a year or more. It doesn't have to, right? Like David and I have been a part of some really amazing just customer interactions and experiences where we can get that reduced heavily. But part of doing that is by a known infrastructure that is well established and secure and compliant.
Right, and I think in the software factory, and then also in the U.S. Air Force doing this before, like I've seen several talks from them on this ATO point of once you have a trusted platform in
Yes.
place and you get people to trust it,
Yes.
right? Like, and if you layer it correctly, then whenever you have like I don't know what the terminology would be, but if you've got a one wouldn't want to say shifty in this context, but you've got a fast evolving thing at the top of the stack, right? That's changing. What's advantageous about the stack below it is that like you trust that stack and you don't have to like
Yep.
accreditate it every single time,
It,
right? And so
reciprocity.
to David's point,
Yeah.
yeah, right? So to David's point, like you know stuff is happening in the AI world all the time, right? Like relative to other spaces. Maybe it's not every day, but like there's new models coming out, new ways of using it. And so what is the linkage between that kind of like here's the secure stack including data and how do I hook it up to like this ever evolving layer without having to like validate every single thing whenever I want to release something? Or are we not there yet? Like kind of what's the state of that platformy stuff at the moment?
I want to highlight one really, really critical thing you said. One of my favorite phrases to talk through with customers is reciprocity, and you kind of mentioned a few teams earlier in this effort. And what I've taught my most recent software factories is the way to know that you've done a good job, right? That you've done something that is both secure and compliant is not whether your stakeholders believe it's secure and will use it. It's whether somebody else will. Because in the DoD,
Mm.
there's a memo in the earlier this year from the DoD CIO that says reciprocity must be used whenever possible. Reciprocity being another organization using something that's already been accredited. And so the challenge, back to what you said, if it's been accredited in that an authorizing official, which is the final, the leader basically of an organization, says something is secure, but they have the ability to just say that it's secure without actually understanding how it was secured or doing a thorough review. So again, with reciprocity in mind, the way that you know that your software factory, that your team has done a good job securing something, is whether another unrelated organization looks at the work you've done and the processes and says, "Wow, they did a great job. I believe that the work they did was good." Um, and that's again for all the different things, whether it's an AI application, data science, whatever the case may be, that to me is the true mark. If somebody else looks at what you've done and says, "Wow, that's great work," I agree. I will use the work that you've done in my system.
Maybe I'll pass this to you, David. Like, so when you get that, when you're trying to get to that level with the platform, right? And if you look at like kind of the new AI services that you're adding in, like how do you plug it into I'm not gonna be able to say the word reciprocity.
Reciprocity.
That's There you go. That's the kind of word it takes me a lot of effort to say correctly. But like, what is that looking like? Kind of like with half a foot in sort of like thinking about policy, but also how people are actually implementing, like making sure that the models that they're running, the way that they're using, is kind of follows policy in that stack, but that so that to your point, Chris, that other people will want to use it.
Well, this isn't a new market. Let's not forget that. This is something where people are still trying to figure out what that means. But the success I'm seeing in different places is when there's a mechanism to enable developers just to develop in, like a marketplace model. The ability to say what's available in an easy way. I'll say when I follow some companies, sometimes it's just a website that says, "Hey, here's the models you can use." Uh, then your office environment might be configured from your data center differently. So when the developers are developing things, they don't realize the data center needs to have firewall rule changes or the infrastructure has to change. And that's where, the reciprocal communication is key to making sure you have, but also inheritance, which I'm surprised Chris hasn't covered in our conversation yet, because inheritance is one of those things that we live upon. It's a similar idea of reciprocal, but it's more on the each layer of the platform, from the underlying IaaS to the underlying PaaS to the underlying, providers of the languages you're working on. Each one, the developers is reciprocally trusting the lower layers are happening. But even with those tools, we know that in an ATO environment, Chris, how often do they go back and reassess them every 6 months or a year to make sure they're following that same practices? So it's not just a horizontal reciprocal communication. It's also it's also the vertical between the layers of it, and having a strong marketplace or guardrails of controls of tools, or some way for developers to just use the languages they're using and not have to interface. So like if we didn't have, say Spring AI, all those Spring developers would have to start writing in, Python, which I'm not a Python person, but I've probably written about 1,000 lines of Python in the last few months, because it's sometimes just easier to use those languages. It's making sure that you allow the developers and the teams who are making those features just to be able to consume them. And how do we make that so they don't have to be concerned that this model is allowed, this is not allowed? How do we actually make the applications function in a proper way that meets the intent of what our policy, which has been established forever, wants to protect that data? Now, some of it isn't fully there, like these MCP, like agentic things we're talking about. Those are still new. Those are still being figured out. And in the end, it is just another API that we're all standardizing and saying, hey, we're going to use this API to talk to each other. Now we got to figure out, how does the application respond to, oh, do you have data that I can use for what my data uses? So part of that is making sure developers make that mindset change, saying, I'm working on a program that deals with this function, say wire transfers, it's money going from one account to another. But then all of a sudden you say, well, you have to now talk to this other agent over here that validates that this is a multi-factor. So maybe it's for somebody transferring money for banks, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and they want to make sure at least 2 officers from the bank approve it. So now we've got this agentic workflow where it has to go out and query through a chat with the 2 brokers who are on their yachts around the world somewhere, making sure they approve these transactions. So having the idea that developers are now thinking, well, what can I use this now easier to access to make my functions work? So it's just allowing them to think freer, and saying, oh, how can I do what I'm doing, but with the more resources available? Because now everybody's using the same API. We're just not really there yet with the API. We've all just kind of agreed, hey, agentic's a cool idea. It allows these models to talk together, but we haven't quite gotten to the point of actually fully like realizing that use yet. At least it's getting there. I think the next year's gonna be really interesting with the stuff that happens.
But there's 2 things you said there that kind of reinforce this idea we're going back to of like, you're building up this stack that you're inheriting from, and I'll to word salad all the gobbledygook the words. But one is that before you introduce something new like AI, you should probably make sure the not AI stuff is in good shape. Right. And like, not only, I mean, obviously in good shape as far as policy and security, but kind of outside of this area, so, one what would you say, an idea I've seen floating around for the past couple of months is, maybe outside of the defense space and like other stuff like that, although probably there too. But one of the things that enterprises are encountering is their like application portfolio had a lot of tech debt in it already, and maybe was a little creaky. And then you just try to add in this new type of thing, and it's the same problems you always had. Right? Like integrating with the data and having a slow release cycle, all of these things. And definitely when it comes to making things are secure. So I don't quite have it like settled in my head, but it's sort of like there's almost a assess how much, I'm just going to say tech debt, but assess how not perfect you are and see if you're even ready to like start adding this new thing into there, right? Which seems like common sense when you say it, but probably a lot of people encounter that. And then the second thing, which I think is maybe it's a little less practice, is kind of getting ahead of the developers, and then the business, the people asking the developers to do stuff, getting ahead of what their needs are so that you can give them something like Spring AI or give them something like a framework instead of them building it all on their own, just sort of like doing things out of policy. And I don't know, tell me what y'all's experience is, but that feels like, for as fast paced, to use marketing talk, for as fast paced as AI stuff is, that seems kind of hopeful at the moment, that you can actually start, that we kind of know what the patterns are and we can get ahead of it before developers go out and just create a big mess with all their eagerness to do things.
Tech debt isn't free. I just wanted to get that chance to throw it in there, and I'll throw it over to you,
Yeah.
Chris, because tech debt, it's one of those big things. Is the most successful places are going to be those that have spent the effort and they've invested in the modernization of the way they make their software, because the software is running their business. If they haven't handled modernization practices and the changes to enable the teams to respond the speed the AI things are changing, and then the business can have its speed and governance whatever it's going at and governs that. But tech debt is not free. You will pay either to get it fixed then, or when you make AI interfaces don't work right and you fix it later. But it's not free. But
Yeah, and then there's wow, lots of just good stuff to talk through here. So, uh, RMF, the Risk Management Framework process, was created, I think, in 2007 is when it was signed. So we've had 18 years at this point to try to understand how to assess information systems from a DoD perspective, which private sector uh, does eventually does follow in some ways, but especially some of the things I'm about to talk about, we can see that shift to more and more following some of the NIST processes and some of the guidance. So the things you mentioned, Cote, building up the stack, introducing new technology like AI, ensuring that what you have already is in good shape, and then getting ahead of the developers. So I am going to kind of incorporate some of the software factory model into what I'm about to say. So again, RMF 2007 started off as this huge overarching, how do we understand a system? How do we actually understand the risk that's introduced by data, of course, but by an infrastructure? And then as that's evolved over the last few years, the next step was what's called an assess only. How do we take a system that's already accredited and add a software component or a hardware component without reaccrediting the entire thing? And so we start with something that's like 2,000 questions. How do we then just make that into a smaller, just a change that's maybe about 600 questions? Because the assumption, back to your point, is that the infrastructure itself is already assessed. We already know the risk. We already know it's fine. So how do we hone in on just the small subset of risk introduced by this component? And so then now in the last probably circa 2017, 2018, as the software factory became established, we started to say, okay, how do we shift away from this? I think a few minutes ago you said something about the cycle. It could be as long as 3 years. So you do an ATO, and it could be 3 years before the system is reauthorized. A lot can change in 3 years. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot. And so how do we, with developers in mind as well, with that shift, how do we actually establish principles? How do we make it more continuous rather than point in time? And so what the software factory model has done is say, okay, how do we start with that accredited platform, that big picture ATO, and then how do we introduce tools that can be rapidly assessed, that can give capabilities to developers But then how do we simplify the developer process? Because see, I mentioned that assess only that was about 600 questions. When you develop your own software, that's part of that assessment. How do we hone in on the things that are critical to development? And so, David, you brought up inheritance. Inheritance is a huge part of that. One of the things that we've done successfully, and a huge part of that is how we incorporate Tanzu into our customer environments, is understanding the risk of the platform. And then instead of handing developers hundreds of questions to answer, it's how do we actually teach them concepts? Just okay, back to that SS only, for instance, there's 600 questions. Well, what if we could whittle that down? What if we could use the platform inheritance and say, no, things like end-to-end encryption, authentication, auditing, much of that capability is provided by your platform that's already accredited. But if we could just teach the security concepts, what you as a developer need to make sure your application includes, we can whittle that down to 30 or 40 key things from 2000 originally. And now what we're doing is making compliance a byproduct of good security. And that's one of the things I say often to my customers: don't focus on compliance as the critical piece. Focus on good security hygiene. Focus on just what is necessary to actually secure your application, and then the compliance will be a byproduct of that. When it's done correctly, when inheritance is done correctly.
Tell me a little bit more. Let's frame it this way. So, you brought up the software factory, which is a thing and a concept,
Yeah.
if you will. And if you were to kind of, reduce it down to a kit, right? Like the not only the thinking and the process, but like the gear, like 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional, like how what is the kit that you have that enables that kind of thing, right? That, where you're outlining, the developers have a lot of this stuff taken care of for them, and we're anticipating that they're going to need this. So instead of them having to kind of like think about it and maybe even develop it or source it every time, it's just here for them to use a platform, if you will.
Yeah. So the DoD has actually released great guidance. Going back to what I was sharing, how the private sector is actually in many ways shifting to the DoD model. And David can speak on this too. But we in broader terms, we call this continuous compliance. DoD calls it continuous ATO, authorization to operate. But for customers in high risk environments, it's continuous compliance. How do we continuously incorporate good security and compliance concepts? So to your question about the kit, DoD, again, we're gonna break down hundreds of pages into just the kit, right? They're looking for three things. They're looking for a fully accredited platform. So again, the security of your infrastructure. Back to what I read, even for the AI tooling, same thing, right? There's so many parallels here. You start with a known good state. You start with that compliant infrastructure. The second thing that they're looking for is how is it validated? Through both supply chain principles and third-party cyber defense. And then lastly is really interesting. It's how do you monitor it? One of the and David, I hope you'll share a little bit. But some of the most recent innovations we've done is real-time understanding of both compliance status and health of your environment. So again, the accredited platform. Second is third-party monitoring and supply chain. A lot to unpack in that, but just a high level, knowing where your applications, knowing where your security risk is being introduced, and having that monitored. And then the third layer is how are you able to self-monitor, continuous monitoring of your own system. And again, that's hundreds of pages of information, all broken down into how are continuous ATOs, how are software factory models evaluated.
So the tech that's there, it all comes down to is how easily do each of the layers we talked about perform their updates. Updates is part of continuous compliance. Is can I make the updates I need to keep the risk? Because risk changes every day. New vulnerabilities are introduced, new connections are introduced, new services. Things are always changing. They're always in flux. And it goes back to how app modernization isn't just microservices. It's building an organization that allows itself to respond as needed to the parts of the application that are the parts of the business that are changing. So it's that ability to move fast. Just because you have a platform doesn't mean it's got its ATO. Doesn't mean it's going to be upgraded next month. How do you enable it so the platform can upgrade? Think about this. I was having a conversation with someone who's a large cache customer. It's a very, very large cache, and you're picturing the petabytes of memory size of cache. How do you do an upgrade on something like that when there's trillions of transactions a day going across something. Where a microsecond is a long time to have an interruption. And now that introduces the risk of not upgrading it, but also introduces the risk of doing the change. It's like quantum physics in a way. Just by looking at you affect it. Um, we had how do you allow those upgrades to happen? But just because you allow it doesn't mean people are doing it. And that's where tech debt starts coming in. Is we've had the ability to upgrade apps, but it's difficult. Things break. Things are hard. We want to work on it gets complex. And how can you upgrade a system if you don't put things properly? And this is one of those areas where having a platform is great, but understanding what you're running on it, you have to communicate. You can't just have a platform and just say people come use it. That trust comes because you have a communications channel. You are, and this is where hopefully agentic will come in. Is we'll have apps that'll talk to the platform and say, "Hey, I'm this kind of app. I need this kind of environment to run." And then they'll go, "Oh, we have this cluster of systems. You go over here because that one updates every month versus every quarter." And it allows the app hopefully to run in the environments that meet its needs. But as Chris mentioned, the NIST framework is coming everywhere. In the financial space, the banking in the U.S., the FFIEC, is moving toward the NIST framework. This continuous ATO is part of PCI. It's how do we look at the stuff we're doing? We in Tanzu, all of our software, we have to meet Broadcom's requirements on vulnerabilities and the way we secure things. As Chris mentioned, static analysis and code analysis. And one of the things that I did as when we first became part of Broadcom, and we're like, oh my gosh, we have to do make sure we're not just enforcing it. Now that we didn't do it in VMware or we didn't do it in Pivotal, we've always had continuously update. That's one of the things we've said about our products is we are continuously updating. We're making sure our product has a way to continuously update. We knew that's part of that story, but now the level of documenting that and reporting and talking, it's like your typical corporate environment. You have a lot more documentation, and so we turn that around. How can we use that data to help our customers? And that's the same mindset companies are having. Is how can we use this massive amount of data we have to prevent fraud, to prevent and things people don't want to have happen to their business, their data. So it's re-enabling that, and I think that the agent now, bringing it back to the AI side of the story, is just another pair in that partnership. A great developer is not going to be replaced by an AI, but they will use an AI to become an even better developer. Having a pair that's AI, 'cause we don't have enough people in the end. I would love to pair up with our development teams and just code with them all day and be that security voice while coding through things. But we can't. But maybe we can have those agents as part of their IDE. So when they're working on code going, hey, that library you're using, there's a newer version, you should use this. And when you do that, it's going to change these 3 functions you've written. You've got to go back and update those. Having that we could do that with the technology that's available. And it's amazing to know that pair is available to just help without having to hinder.
You brought up kind of like the staffing thing, David, and there's another side question. We'll see how deep this rabbit hole goes. But especially among programmers, and other people, but there's this notion of like, oh, this AI stuff is going to replace us. But in my mind, like, I don't know if I've ever talked with like an organization who's like, yeah, we pretty much can get all of our work done. And so, all we need to do is like replace the people that we have with something that's cheaper. But it seems like there's always an infinite amount of work to do. And so really, the more people or the more functionality you could get, the better, right? And you reminded me of this because like you brought up a good example of you probably should be not only reviewing your code, but when you upgrade your code, that's a lot of work. And so if you have more people who can help you out with it, it'll go faster than you can get the stuff. So, but anyways, I'm curious, like in the people you talk with, like, do they have that, let's say, more human friendly view that like what we're doing is adding capacity to like do more, not lower the costs on what we're currently doing?
I, I'll say from my point of view, I don't talk to the people who are doing things for financial. Like I'm not talking to a CFO going, we've got 10,000 employees. Well, how can we trim? That's not a conversation there's never been enough security people. There's never been enough, because security decades ago was like, whatever was in front of us that needed security, we worked on. Now there's firewall security people, there's app security people, there's different, and just in app security, there's different specialists of, middleware, backend. There's UI experts. There's security is such a broad space now that I don't think we'll ever get to a point where it's going to replace things. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, you're going to replace it. Well, at least maybe it's going to be a plumber because, AI won't replace that. But I've seen, the ability to take a picture of the pipes that Palmer's been working on, and it will analyze it and tell you if it's code compliant, so you can save time for your actual
Yeah.
inspector to come through. They still have to come through, but the worker can know, hey, I validated my work. I didn't, it's going to be in everywhere it's helpful. I, there will be people impacted. Having robotics and can change manufacturing. Things will change, but there will always be things to get done if people want to work. So I
Yeah.
don't, I don't. Things will change, but I don't think it's going to be the end of the world for all of us.
So and now, uh, talk about timing. Saturday morning, I was actually in a live presentation on AI, by a 25-year Microsoft veteran. And so one of the conclusions he came to at the end, he said that the reality is that there's, again, his perspective, there's going to be three types of people impacted by AI. And he said group one is the people that the moment they hear AI, they shut down. They don't want anything to do with it. They don't want to learn about it. It's something that is scary to them. And again, this is for tech personas, right? This is not your normal person. He's talking in the context of tech. He said group two is going to be interested. They're going to learn how to use AI to make their job a little bit simpler, um, which is good, right? They're going to start to incorporate it into their daily, what they do, but still not that last level. He said group three are going to be the ones that actually see AI and they look for new opportunities in tech. And so,
Mm.
from my perspective, cybersecurity, I more and more am confident that all that introducing AI, generative AI technologies, and as it evolves, is just revealing gaps for people that are dedicated and passionate about cybersecurity. It's going to make their job even better. It's going to make it. Again, the guy speaking Saturday morning said it's made my job more fun because I get to find new ways to innovate and to be creative and to use this technology, and it shows value. So for people that are using AI technology correctly, um, I really believe it's just going to enhance your value. It's going to show it's going to introduce new vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. It's going to introduce because for years now I've heard people going back to 2007 when RMF was established. It's easy for people to focus on the toil and try to the carpenter and the nail analogy, right? To a carpenter with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so a lot of times in compliance, that's the slippery slope we get into is it's always a spreadsheet, it's always a checklist, it's always a standard way of doing that. What AI and even what continuous ATO and these new approaches do is they give a chance to shine. They give a chance for cybersecurity people to actually stand out in their understanding of defense in depth, these traditional defensive strategies, and look for new threat vectors. And so, yeah, I mean, I agree with David. I think that the best thing you can do, yes, there will always be work in cybersecurity. I think the best thing that we can do as passionate professionals about this is learn how AI can augment and can help us identify new vectors, new threats, new compliance, new opportunities, frankly, to teach customers and to have people engaged. I mean, I'm telling you, the last year I've been even in really the last 6 months, we've done so many things to help educate customers, and customers are embracing it because this is unknown. This is something that even as I read DoD policies, a lot of it, the core idea is a lot of this is new to us. Please do the best you can to analyze and fortify your defenses. And so, as innovators, the more we embrace this and engage it, and again, look for those attack vectors and teach and educate our customers, the more value there is.
Even making mistakes is good. So
Yes.
the experimentation, the ability to recognize quickly, hey, this was a mistake. But if it's a mistake, then it allows you to go back to your policy and say, well, maybe what we were doing over here was a mistake. If we're trying to bring AI into something and it turns out it's not right, well, maybe it's not necessarily that it was failed. Maybe what was based upon the rationale of why we did it. So having that ability to quickly fail is just as important as successes.
So there's two more things I wanted to ask before we wrap up. The first one is so we mentioned the need to have like policy broadly put these things in place, and I think I mentioned earlier I've talked with a lot of people who have they've got like AI policy working groups that are setting things up, and it I don't know. Maybe I try too hard professionally to be cynical, and I should not be. But like I was thinking of like those cloud centers of excellence, and they always seemed to not be helpful, right? To kind of be some kind of bottleneck for things happening. And so I'm wondering, like, maybe we don't call it a center of excellence. We could call it something like that. But this central body that's trying to like govern and set policy for something, like at the beginning of this AI era, like how should they be operating so that they don't become this bottleneck that you have to wait like 6 months to have a meeting with, or whatever? Like how can they speed things up?
Well, sometimes you're going to have that bottleneck. It's just if the larger organizations, it's just a size thing. But there are two groups that I've seen that are involved that you have to have involved. One is going to be legal, because there are terms of service for both consuming and using the AIs and the models in certain ways. And it might mean that you have to share your code. It might mean that your data now becomes part of their data set. So there's a
Mm,
whole legal side to, can we use this from a legal protection of us as an organization? The second one is cybersecurity. Does the model, again, take our data and transport it somewhere else we didn't want? Does it actually allow us to put our controls in function? Can we run it in an air-gapped environment? Does it have those controls? Outside of that is it's just a business need, and I'll let Chris throw in, how it changed a little bit on DoD, but in the commercial side, the business also has to say, you can't just override and say, hey, we need this technology. I don't care what it does to the business. They would never do that anyway,
right.
because they want the business to succeed. But I would say legal and security are the gatekeepers. In the larger organization, you are, the slower some things are going to be because they were already overloaded. Now it's going faster. I've seen things just in our own space here. It changes daily, because the world changes daily. But you're never going to get around that in a large organization, because you don't want to do something as a developer and just go, hey, I'm just going to grab this model and use it, without realizing you've just committed. Their term says if it's used by any organization, the license is based on the number of developers in the organization. So if you have a 5,000 developer organization, one person downloaded and started using that, now means the company is liable for 5,000 license. There's a cost liability, there's a data liability, and then there's the security liabilities.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, because isn't the terms of like Meta's model that like there's a certain amount of like end users and then you have to pay for it, which I if I'm remembering correctly, when that came out, I was like, I guess the U.S. government can't use this then, right? Like the with all the seats that they would have for everything.
So, and one thing I want to hone in for a second that David mentioned, in one of the last software factories I worked with, I got to know the legal representative very well, and it was interesting because there are actual policies in the DoD on the different types of open source licensing. Because a lot of teams will do, I think, kind of what David was alluding to. Hey, it's open source; we can just use it, and that's not true. There are some open source licenses that literally say not for military use or not for DoD use in the actual
Right.
license. And so there's little factors like that you have to be aware of. Um, Back to simplifying it. I I don't know how to implement this, but it's just talking. One of the things that got me really excited early on as I started working with software factories was when you when you introduce inheritance and when you teach security as concepts rather than checklists, every single time I would see literally a shift often in a developer's face as they realized I can do this. When you got them to a place where they actually
Hmm.
saw security as something to be excited about, and that was tenable, that was something that they could actually do instead of being so impossible and intimidating. Again, a checklist. Every time you could like see the shift and the light, and they would go, "Oh, I can do this. I want to do this." I have never had a developer now in 10 years of post active duty tell me I don't want to do security. Now they might question compliance, they might question all of that burden, but they get excited about
Right.
security because they have pride in their work. They have pride in what they're doing. And so as we're thinking about these AI working groups, going back to the original question, I wish there was a better way. Um, for me personally, I love talking to customers. I love saying, "What are your challenges? How can we tailor what we're doing for you?" Because as our team here, has spent months and even years tailoring our products, trying to understand our customer need. So my recommendation, if we're talking about a working group, it would be just interact with your customers, interact with the people that are using whether it's a product or whether we're talking in general about GRC, policies and compliance. It's actually get in the field, stop operating in the theoretical, but really get to know what the needs are. So, and hopefully, is that kind of where you're going with that?
What I'm
Yeah.
understanding you to say, so to speak,
Thanks.
is if you're setting policy for something, you should go observe and talk with the
Mhm.
people who will be living with your policies,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
kind of like see the work that they do and how the policy applies to it. And then also, in addition to just the first time, it's probably good to go back and check
Is
again,
it working?
right? Like kind of go check in and see how things are evolving and
Yeah.
working and what's needed. And I think maybe that's the issue with the center of excellence is like it's okay to have a center that you go to every now and then, but you should also be decentered. I guess you'd say decentralized.
Yeah.
Like you got to get out of the center and go check on other things and see how you can help them out with what they're
In
doing.
some ways, it's back to that
And
reciprocity concept. The true measure of whether something is successful is whether somebody else believes it is, not just
Right.
you.
and sometimes having tools, I'll give the little work plug here because it does help the world if it's helpful to anyone who listens today is if you have tools like we have an AI server that provides that a programmatic way to make those policies. So if you have a tool that you can say and change daily those policies of what's allowed for model consumption, so developers again just use it as a marketplace and they just it allows them just to work and enjoy the work they're working on without having to go to that central place and say people what's changing. They can see it just right in there and they can just programmatically consume it will also help, I think.
And I get that goes all the way back neatly to what we were talking about earlier. Our multi-page explanations of why our stuff is secure and accredited and things like that. Like I think that's what you look for when you're sourcing stuff like a platform is like as you're saying, trusting in it by having all of that documentation behind it. Well, this has been fun to go over this, and it's always interesting to talk about this topic. Like, do we've mentioned the Tanzu platform and the AI stuff in it several times, but is there something in particular on this topic you would point people to if they want to check out more on it?
We do have an AI starter, which maybe we can get that in the show notes. Folks can just jump right to
Yeah.
it and download it. But it allows you to build that AI service and consumption model to actually use it and play with it. That'd probably have them start there, or they can just reach out and happy to talk. Also, I am not a quiet person, if y'all said.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the AI starter kit we have it's a good collection of uh, how to think about the strategy of what you're doing, kind of the platform stuff we have available, and then also I should probably know the exact wording, but you can get a 90-day trial of running it, so you can just like try it out and see how it's working, which I think is pretty phenomenal as far as removing bottlenecking and friction to test things out. But yeah, we'll definitely put a link to that. Well, thanks again, and yeah, it's always good to hear from people listening, like what they're doing in this area, how they're building up that trust for people to use things, and actual, my obsession is always like, what are you actually doing with this AI stuff? Because I know the little silly things I do with it, but it's always good to hear what I don't know what
Well,
real world,
uh,
not my personal life uses are.
I would at one point though. We'll have our agents reach into your D&D stuff because I think that would be a really interesting way of having a player AI and then your
That's
DM
right.
AIs and allow our games to play for ourselves and we can just watch it.
Yeah. It'll be like what do they call it? Lit RPG, where we can just read. Although during the pandemic, I think there was the rise of listening to other people playing D&D and role playing games. But yes, that would be good to see a perfectly machine log of machines playing with each other. Well, and with that, you've enjoyed people talking with each other, and we'll see everyone next time. Bye bye.